Thank you, Maya Lili, and all of you good people. I am Kilslaay Kaajii Sding. I am Miles Richardson. I'm from the Haida Nation. I am really honored to accept the invitation of the Garma festival organizers and tell a little bit of my people's story, a little bit of Canada's story on a similar reconciliation journey that we've been on, that you're in the midst of. And I know that we have much to learn from each other in that regard. I know certainly I've learned so much over the past few years. First of all, I want to thank and acknowledge the Gomach clan on, as the Prime Minister said this morning, at least I hope this is what he said, the people whose territory this was, is, and will always be the owners of this territory. I thank them very much and for the welcome, and to each and every Aboriginal clan in Australia. Last time I was in a room with the Prime Minister of Australia and Patrick Dodson was in 1996 at the 4th Reconciliation Conference in Melbourne. That was a really powerful and emotional time. It happened in the wake of the Australian court's decision in Wick, where the courts had found Aboriginal title superseded grazing rights, apparently a big issue in Australia, an issue that I was very familiar with forest cutting rights and that type of thing in British Columbia. And here I was in the room, and up on the stage was Prime Minister Howard, his cabinet, his governing caucus, the opposition, and the Governor General, all up on the stage at this one time. And he was responding to the Indigenous people over the Wick decision. And I'll never forget his words. He says, "The legal pendulum has swung too far in your favor. And for your own good, I'm going to legislate it back." All the people, all the Aboriginal people in the room stood up and with their regalia and whatever they had, turned their back on him as a show of contempt, I'd put it. That's the way I took it. And then this 6'5", three-piece suit, dapper guy came up to the mic, and he was the Desmond Tutu's co-chair on South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he's red, he's just mad. You could see he was angry. And he says, "This road you're talking about going down, Prime Minister, my country has been down it, and it's the wrong road. And I note that you're inviting the world to Australia in 2000 for the Olympics. And if you go down this road, the rest of us are going to have something to say to you." Of course, they went ahead and did what he threatened to do, and the rest never heard a peep from the rest of the world. So I was really excited this morning to hear the words coming from the Prime Minister. And I don't want to sound cynical or anything, because I'm not. But I'll tell you, I've heard it all before. But the words are so good. I have a cousin who lives in Sydney. She moved over here. She's my dad's oldest sister's daughter, raised her family as an Australian family. And she read the newspaper this morning, and she follows our politics too, Haida politics, and she sent me a text. All she said is, wow, just wow, about the announcement. So I really pray for Australians. And remember, this is about the country of Australia. It's not about the Indigenous people. The Indigenous people Indigenous people are who they are. They're not going to change being who they are, I don't think, for anybody. And they've been very welcoming. I really like what the Prime Minister said about it's an amazing gift of patience by the Aboriginal people that Australia has a chance to do this after the 200-odd year history of colonialism. That's such an act of generosity by the Aboriginal people to afford this opportunity for Australians to do the right thing. And I really pray, I'm thinking, I've heard this before, but maybe this is it. Canada needs you to do this, Australia. You know, the rest of the Commonwealth, the rest of humankind needs Australia to seize this moment and figure out how to reconcile. You know, it might be having a referendum on your intent and then following that up with a treaty are the right thing to do. In process-wise, that's how us humans have set up our lawmaking system so that we can resolve disputes without always having to bonk each other over the head. And if we can figure this out and beginning with that process, we can do it. But from my limited experience, I know one thing. The solution lies in the relationship. In the relationship between the Aboriginal people of Australia and the people of Australia that are building the Constitution of this country. And that relationship must happen on a nation-to-nation level. There's no other way. I mean, for the government of Australia to come in and tell the story of the Aboriginal people, telling them they're somebody they're not, they are the people of this land. They are the people who have exercised sovereignty and title and jurisdiction over this land for untold millennia. That story isn't going to change. But imagine if you could come to terms with that and figure out a harmonious way forward. Yesterday, I was just so encouraged by Elder Ja Piri when she said, she was imagining success. And she said, imagine if our people's knowledge could come together with your knowledge, the science-based system. She said it would be magic, and it would mean for us a happy future. I have not heard it more eloquently put than that. I've spent my life chasing that same dream with Canada, not ever questioning who I am. I know who I am quite well, quite fine. But chasing that dream and building that trust so that once we have the constitutional recognition of Indigenous people and a constitutional process to talk to each other and the jurisdictional tools through regional treaties to put in place to balance and harmonize laws, you still are not going to accomplish that without trust. You've got to trust each other that you're serious about moving forward. And so I just pray for you. I really, I think the world needs what you have to offer. So let me just briefly, I want to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So I want to tell you where I'm from. I want to tell you a little bit about the Haida Nation's experience with pursuing reconciliation, where we're at. We're not there yet. I want to talk about the general experience in Canada and the province of British Columbia, the more blanket things, and just a couple of final comments about the way forward, what I think we need to do to get there. And I think you've talked about all of that. So if you look at the map, Haida Gwaii is an archipelago of islands off the north coast of British Columbia in the Northeast Pacific. We're 100 miles off the coast of Prince Rupert, 500 miles north of Vancouver, British Columbia, as the crow flies. But our northern shore is 40 miles from Alaska's southern shore. And half of our population, half of the Haida Nation, have American citizenship that are on the U.S. side of the border. And that has been our home since our creation on this earth. I'm an eagle. Every Haida is either an eagle or a raven. You see the back of my vest. I'm an eagle. I'm from the Eagle clan, and we trace our lineage on our mother's side. And this is a subcrest of mine, the sculpin, the wonderful bullhead is also my crest. But our people have been in our homelands, matter of fact, in our traditional villages since our creation on this earth. Scientists have confirmed through CO2 carbon dating 15,000 years, but suffice it to say that since our ancestors emerged out of the ocean, we're ocean people, and our stories, creation stories, tell us we emerged out of the ocean at our respective villages. And that's how long we've been there. And we've had issues of reconciliation during the 240 odd years that Canada, since the Spanish sailboat sailed out of the mist in the northern part of our islands and started this phase of history. So reconciliation has been on my mind, on our mind too. So I grew up I didn't have much politics. You know, we were the majority population on our island. As far as I was concerned, we controlled it. You know, I knew it was Haida land, and then I went away to university. But when I came back home, something happened that I hadn't bargained for, is the people decided that since I had a university degree, I must know something. And anyway, next thing you know, I'm elected political leader of our nation. And really figuring out what this challenge is that, you know, I knew Haida Gwaii's Haida land, always has been, is now, and always will be. But in that one day, Canada's going to do the right thing by that. So I got elected president, and now I got to figure out, what do I do? And I looked around, and our current, the older guys, had hired some economists, and they were doing inventories. Every tree they'd ever taken off Haida Gwaii, they listed it and valued it. Every fish they'd taken, all the minerals they'd taken, etc. And apparently they were going to send them a bill. And so I sat down with our elders, and they just said to us, I was the senior leader, but it was a group of young people who delved into this. And they said to us, you know, waiting for justice, all those, their words are so good. their commitments in the law, their commitments to justice. They're going to deal with us someday. They all sound so good, but it just ain't working for us, they told us. And they said, you know, they've taken all our trees, they've taken most of our fish, they've taken all our minerals. Now they're going to drill for oil and gas in our oceans. And you know what they said to us? They said, your generation, Miles, you might not pass the most fundamental test that every generation of our nation has passed through the millennia. Each generation has passed our culture on to succeeding generations. You may not accomplish that. And they said, forget chasing justice. Forget trying to get this majority to follow their own law. We're not here because of checks or money from their capitals. We are here because of the richness of our homelands. We are here because of our life source, Haida. And you see, in the ocean there, we're obviously marine people. I don't have a pointer to see the islands, but you see it just halfway through on the red part of the map, that group of triangular islands off the coast. That's our homeland. And they said, if they take the last tree and kill the last fish, might as well move us to Japan or move us to the Middle East or something. We're just not, it's over. We're not going to be us. So your job is to protect our life source. So I looked around, didn't have a Navy, didn't have any Air Force, or didn't even have any bombs. Didn't have any infantry, no tanks. The heck are we going to do? So we decided that the reason that we're here, and our elders told us this, and we had to, and I see a similar situation happening in many places around the world with indigenous people, is we decided that we had no choice but to invoke our culture. You know, we looked at ourselves, and when each of you Australians look at indigenous people, I want you to answer this question too. My people have been in our homelands for millennia, for hundreds of generations, for thousands of years. Despite all the same colonial oppression that happened here, I can stand in front of you and thump my chest and bellow around and be proud to be the living generation of my ancient nation. Is that a coincidence, do you think? Is it just the luck of the draw? Is it just an anomaly of nature that I can say that? When I look at myself in the mirror, I absolutely know that it's not coincidence, and that the reason we're still here is because of our culture, because of the distilled wisdom that our people have accumulated and ritualized and codified in our practices throughout the year that have allowed us and permitted us and pushed us to thrive in our homelands. So instead of waiting for justice, we went out and we decided we had to, through our cultural means, protect our homelands. So what do? You know, we didn't have the army I talked about. We didn't have people to waste. We did two main things. We put in place a land use plan that was going to stop the logging, that was going to put our people back in charge of decision making, and bring balance back to the relationship between humans and our islands. And that was the first. It was really important how we timed those. Strategically, we did that first. Secondly, but very importantly, because it powered that agenda, Haida law is ancient, and it's clear, and it's precise, and it's practiced every day in our culture, but it's an oral tradition like all the other Indigenous people. We wrote it down. We thought if Canada and British Columbia are ever going to hear us or be able to deal with us, we got to write this down. So we wrote our Constitution. Any of you can Google that on Haida Nation website. And that was the basis. This is what was happening on our islands. The whole forest land base was being destroyed, clear cut. At the same time, our people were people of the ocean, and our culture had given us all the tools we needed to thrive there. That's a halibut hook. You know, if you go out into the commercial industry today, probably even down here, the commercial halibut hooks are now made out of steel, but they're basically the same design as this ancient halibut hook. But our people had a very rich and productive economy off the ocean. This is a painting, but you know, when we talk about invoking our culture and bringing back the thriving values and principles that guide our people, one thing that we did is brought back our traditional governing system, our hereditary chiefs. You see them all on the beach in their regalia, meeting luta, which is Haida canoe, 57 feet long, made from one cedar tree. And the artist who made it is a man named Bill Reed, standing in the bow, bringing the luta home. But that was the strategy. That was our way of asserting our, let me call it our story. You can call it sovereignty, you can call it title, you can call it any of those things, but it's our story. And we knew, and we know today, and I see the same thing with you people, the Aboriginal people here. Our story is second to none in the history of humankind. Our people, our societies are inferior to no one. And the only people who can breathe life into that, others can recognize it, and they should, but the people who can breathe life into it are our own people, and to live that. In that picture, you see that there was the pride reemerging in the story of our nation, our rightful place in our homelands, and our determination to make it right, to win back our authority and regain control over our destiny. So by invoking our culture, we implemented Haida law, our own law. And as we built our Constitution, we didn't ask to negotiate. We told Canada and BC and all of their agencies, you're on Haida Gwaii. This is our land, our oceans. These are the rules now. I wasn't even 30 years old yet. These are the rules now, we told them. And we're not asking you, we're telling you. If you cut one tree over the areas we've designated, we're going to stop you. We didn't know how we were going to stop them, but we meant it. And then while all this is going on, this is a common picture I just couldn't resist. I heard the speeches yesterday, and this is a painting of the residential school experience. When one of my business friends, a non-Haida, saw me said I was coming down here, I brought him home with me last summer, and he sat around with a bunch of Haida matriarchs. and at dinner, and they told him these stories, which we heard yesterday here in this room. And he was so, he's the billionaire. He's from Silicon Valley, and he said, I ask you one thing. When you go down to Australia, tell them that story, please. He didn't know that you had a similar history, but he was saying, we as humans can't allow that to continue, and I know it's your intent to not. But that's why that picture's in there. But that was the era we were coming out of, and I'm just trying to paint you a picture of our little nation, 5,000 people, asserting our law. And when you think about, how do we, you go online, you see our Constitution, it's not that complicated. It has 16 articles or something, our philosophy, our worldview, describe the people, our institutions of governance, etc. You see it, but the key to that is to legitimize Haida laws. And we started passing legislation to protect our islands. And it doesn't have to be complicated. When I was president, the first piece of legislation we passed was one sentence. It read, Dugoose Tribal Park, we drew a line around this big intact part of our islands, which wasn't logged yet. And the legislation read, Dugoose Tribal Park will remain in its natural state in perpetuity. That was our legislation. Then we sent out letters to all the forest companies who had plans to cut there, all the governments who issued their permits. First forest company was Saito in Japan. I'll never forget that. We sent them the letter. They honored it. They sold the TFL. The guy who bought it was a local guy. He hasn't tried to go in there to this day. 14 areas on our islands we protected with legislation like that. And this was the early 80s. Forestry was the lifeblood of British Columbia and Canada. They couldn't let the Haidas stop them like this. So when we got to Guayhanas, they battled us. We set up, I see Australian Aborigines. 30 years ago, we set up Haida Gwaii Watchmen. This is our logo. Haida Guardians out on the land, informing, first of all, most importantly, hosting people, telling them they're in Haida Gwaii, these are the rules, and helping them through it. And I noticed that we've taken a lot of strength from Australia, and this is led by the Indigenous people, but supported by the people of Australia through their government, the Ranger program. It's a world-class program that it bodes really well for reconciliation. It's a really powerful first step, and hopefully over the years we can continue to work together on building those types of things. But when you talk about changing the paradigm on our islands, on our life source, this was the 14-point plan we put in place. We just sat down, strategically looked at what was left from what they'd taken, what was intact, and we put lines around them. All those blue areas are the 14 protected areas we, on our own authority, drew lines around. We did that in about 1980. In 2010, in 1990, on the bottom of the island, the light blue area, we signed a joint management agreement with Canada. And it was funny because they wouldn't even talk about sovereignty. They just said, so we said, well, why would we talk to you? But we had blockaded, we'd stopped the logging, and they needed the agreement. So this is how we dealt with it, and it was an interim step. We put the government of Haida, Council of the Haida Nation on behalf of the Haida Nation. The agreement is between the nation of Canada, represented by the government of Canada. And then section 1 of the agreement was regarding sovereignty, ownership, and jurisdiction. The parties believe as follows, and we drew a line down the middle of the page. And on one side, we put what we wanted about those matters. On the other side of the page, Canada put what they wanted. And under that, we put, on these matters, we disagree. But we'd reached agreement on the cultural and natural features of the area that we're jointly committed to protecting. So then we put in place a management plan to agree on those. And then in 2010, we signed an agreement with the government of BC over the remainder of the terrestrial areas of Haida. So today, not one land use decision is made in our traditional territories, in our islands, without specific legislated consent of the Haida Nation, legislated on the Haida side and on the Crown side. Now we're working on the oceans areas. When we're done with the oceans, we'll work on the airspace. And that's that process of reconciliation. I could go on and tell you about the Canada story. I think the Haida story is much more interesting, because I think you've done as much. Your path is very similar on the national front. This is just the proclamation of the Haida Nation. It's really important to start off with who you are, what your story is, how you see yourself in the world. Of course, we had to let other people know what our story is and what our position was. We had to do a lot of information sessions and blockades. We went and put ourselves between the loggers and the forests that they were decimating, that they were getting close to decimating. And I know I'm going, how long have I been on, Sean? 35, okay. Let me just end with this then, and I know we're running out of time for questions, but one thing that really made a difference in this whole campaign, and I know it sounds a bit far-fetched that such a strategy would work, but I'm telling you it has worked 100% in terms of the objectives that we'd set, and those objectives were strategically thought through and thought to be possible. But one thing happened while we were blockading the loggers is our people started remembering and re-invoking our ceremonies, our traditional ceremonies. And one of the key ones, which I notice you do too, is feeding the ancestors through the fire. And in the Haida way, there's two ways of getting to the next level of ancestors' spirits that have gone on. One is through a clean ceremonial fire. The other way is through the surface of the ocean. It has the same effect. If you want to feed the ancestor or send it to the next level, you put it on your paddle and push it through the surface of the ocean and it gets there. And I'll tell you that things were really stressful as they were taking our people away and putting them in jail and all that. And when we moved in front of them and started invoking our ceremony, the Hopis sent up crystals to us to align our ceremonies with them, and everything became simple. So much so that one day, on the big day that we were going to have the showdown with the forest companies and the RCMP, we were up early and we were going to go up, and they'd already taken 100 people off our blockades, but we'd had enough. We were going to make our last stand. If we had to pay the ultimate price, we were going to do it that day. Everybody painted their face black in the morning, as the warriors' commitment to each other. And we went up to the road to face them. And they were all in military formation around the corner, and they had to be ready for this. This is their law. And this happened, that picture I showed you. Four of our elders showed up. And I'll never forget that. They come up to the line and I said, "Get out of here. This is a dangerous place today. You got to go down to camp. We got business to do." And one of the third to the right, Ethel, came up to me and just gently put her arm in mine and said, "All our life, we've been watching our islands being destroyed, and we wanted to do something about it. Today is our day to stand. Don't deny us." What the heck am I going to say about that? I just said, go to it. I went down to camp, called all the boys. We're going to do this another day. The elders went to the line. It was on the national news that night. End of story. You invoke those powers, you invoke that culture, you invoke those spirits, good things happen. You have good intentions, and that's all I've heard here from the Aboriginal people is welcome and good intentions, and we know the right way. Let's do it. So again, in closing, I just want to say Godspeed to Australia and to the Aboriginal people in this effort to fix the Constitution, to provide a level playing field. But to the Australian, to the Aboriginal people, I'll say, just remember, and this is what my elders would have said to me, always remember that your land and sea title, your right to self-determination, your place in this world comes from your inherent sovereignty. And your sovereignty is a fact of history. It exists if you decide it exists. And if that sovereignty isn't burning in your heart, it probably doesn't exist. As our elders told us, that the sacred job of every living generation is to pass on that right, that sovereignty to the next generation. And I'm really thankful and pleased for the leadership that you are showing. I'm excited for the leadership that you're about to show the world, and really grateful for the opportunity that you gave me to come here and join you at Garma this year. I know we'll see each other soon, whether it's on that side of the ocean or this one, where we've got a lot to talk about, we've got economies to build, we've got futures to build together. Thank you. Hawa.